Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where the far north breathes secrets into the dark. Tonight we're in Alaska, a place of ice roads, mountain shadows, and skies that flicker like ghostly fires. Here, legends aren't just old tales, they're warnings carved into the land. Every story you'll hear tonight comes from true events, local myths, and first-hand encounters. Before we start, subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next time the night moves. Wrap yourself in something warm. Out there in the dark, a sound is already moving closer. Let's begin. Story 1. Doppelganger of Kodiak. There are two versions of me living in the same house on Kodiak Island, and my family can tell us apart. My name is Thomas Mercer. At least, I think it is. I am 51 years old. I've been a commercial fisherman out of Kodiak for 28 years. Married to Linda for 26. 2 kids, both grown now, but they visit. I know every detail of my life, every memory, every scar, every moment that made me who I am. But so does he, the other one, the thing that looks exactly like me and lives in my house and sleeps in my bed. It started in September. 3 years ago, I'd taken my boat, the North Star, out for a king crab run. 3-day trip, routine. I'd done it 1,000 times. The weather was good, the catch was decent. Nothing unusual happened. I radioed Linda before heading back in. Told her I'd be home by dinner. She sounded happy. Normal. Everything was fine. I docked at the harbor around 6. Unloaded. Checked in with the processor. Grabbed my gear and drove home through the darkening streets of Kodiak. Looking forward to a shower, and Linda was cooking and sleeping in a bed that didn't rock with the waves. The truck in my driveway was an T-mine. Same make, same model, same year, but mine was at the harbor. I just parked it there 20 minutes ago. My stomach dropped. Someone had stolen my truck. But no, the license plate was mine. The dent in the rear bumper was mine. The faded Seahawks sticker was mine. I stood there trying to make sense of it, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe Linda had come to pick me up and I missed her. Maybe someone had borrowed the truck, but she didn't know exactly when I'd be back. And nobody had keys except me. I walked up to the house. The lights were on. I could smell dinner cooking, hear the television, everything normal. I opened the door. Linda was in the kitchen. She looked up when I came in and her face went white. Not surprised, not confused, terrified. She took a step back, her hand going to her mouth. Then I heard footsteps behind me, heavy boots on the hardwood floor. I turned around. I was standing in my own hallway, looking at myself. Same height, same build, same weathered face and graying beard. Same scar over the left eyebrow from a fishing hook 20 years ago. Same clothes I was wearing. He even had the same oil stain on his jacket from when I changed the winch hydraulics last week. We stared at each other. I don't know for how long. Time seemed to stop. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It kept trying to find explanations. Twin brother. But I'm an only child. Hallucination. But Linda could see him too. Some kind of elaborate prank. But nobody could replicate me this perfectly. He didn't speak. Just looked at me with my own eyes. And I saw something in them. Recognition. Understanding. Like he knew exactly what was happening and had been waiting for this moment. Linda was crying, saying my name over and over. Tommy, Tommy. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at him. She moved toward him, took his hand, looked between us with an expression of complete confusion and fear. I tried to explain. Told her I'd just gotten back from the fishing trip. That I'd been gone 3 days. That this other person, this thing, wasn't me. But she shook her head, said he'd been home all week, that he never left, that I was the one who was wrong. The other me still hadn't spoken. He just stood there, calm, patient, like he was waiting for me to understand something. That is when I noticed the details, the little things that were wrong. His boots were clean. Mine were covered in fish blood and salt residue from 3 days at sea. His hands were smooth. Mine were cracked and raw from working lines in the cold. His jacket smelled like laundry detergent. Mine smelled like diesel and bait. I pointed this out to Linda, showed her my hands, made her smell my jacket. Proof, physical evidence that I was the real one. That I'd been working. That the other one was fake somehow. But she looked at his hands. They were cracked too. Not as badly as mine, but rough enough. And his jacket. When she smelled it, she said it smelled like the boat. Like he'd been working. I watched as the differences I noticed disappeared. His hands grew rougher. The stains on his jacket darkened. Even the smell changed. He was matching me, becoming more like me with every passing second. Not through any visible change, just suddenly being that way. Like reality was adjusting itself to make us identical. My son came home an hour later. David, 23 years old, works at the cannery. He looked between the two of us and his face went slack with shock. But then the other me moved, put a hand on David, his shoulder, said something about the Seahawks game, used the same tone I always used, the same casual affection, and David relaxed, looked at me like I was the stranger, the intruder. I tried to prove myself, brought up memories only David and I shared. The time we went camping at Shuyuk and saw the bear, his first fish, the talk we had about his ex-girlfriend, private things, father and son things. But the other me knew them too, knew every detail, every word, could finish my stories, could add details I'd forgotten. He had all my memories, all my knowledge, all my history. That first night I refused to leave. This was my house, my family. I built this life. Some imposter wasn't going to take it from me. Linda was crying, begging us both to stop, to explain what was happening. But neither of us had explanations. We just stood in the living room, staring at each other, while my wife fell apart between us. Finally, Linda made a decision. She said we both stay. Both sleep here. Figure it out in the morning. She put me in the guest room, him in our bedroom. With her, I lay awake all night, listening to them move around above me, listening to her cry, wondering what I could possibly do to prove I was real. Morning brought no answers. The other me came down to breakfast, poured coffee exactly the way I do, read the paper exactly the way I do, kissed Linda on the forehead exactly the way I do. And she let him, because to her, he was me, just as much as I was. Days passed, then weeks. We fell into a horrible routine, both of us living in the same house, both claiming the same life, both trying to be Thomas Mercer. My family tried to tell us apart at first, asked questions, tested us, but we both knew every answer. Both had every memory, both loved them the same way. Eventually they stopped trying, started treating us both as the same person. Linda would cook dinner and serve us both. David would talk to whichever one of us he saw first. My daughter called and Linda would hand the phone to whichever one was closer. We became interchangeable. The worst part is we never speak to each other, never acknowledge each other directly. We move through the house like ghosts, occupying the same space but never quite colliding. If I walk into a room where he is, one of us leaves. If Linda starts talking to him, I disappear. We developed an unspoken system of taking turns, being the real Thomas Mercer in shifts. I try to understand what he is, where he came from. I researched everything I can find. Doppelgangers, shapeshifters, parallel universes. Nothing fits. Nothing explains how he can be so perfectly me. How he can have memories he shouldn't have. How he can match every change in my body. Every new scar. Every gray hair. As if we somehow linked. The most disturbing theory I found was in an old book about Alutiiq legends from Kodiak. Stories about the Keok Ningwa, the shadow people, beings that live just outside our perception, watching us, learning us, until they find a moment of weakness. A moment when we far from home, isolated, vulnerable. Then they step through, take our place, become us. The book said they don't to replace us. They join us, two versions of the same person, locked together forever, unable to exist separately, unable to prove which one came first. I think about that 3-day fishing trip. About being alone on the water, about the strange fog that rolled in on the second night. How thick it was, how it seemed to move wrong, how I felt like I was being watched. I think maybe that is when it happened, when he crossed over, when he found me. But here is what keeps me awake at night. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm not the original? What if the shadow, the copy? What if I stepped through that fog and came home to find my life already being lived? And my mind created this story to explain why there are two of us. What if he is the real Thomas Mercer and I, the thing that shouldn't exist? I look at my hands sometimes, try to remember if they looked exactly like this before. Try to find some proof that I'm the original, but memories aren't reliable, especially when there are two sets of them, two versions of every moment, both equally real, both equally valid. 3 years now, 3 years of this strange, silent coexistence. Linda has stopped crying. The kids have accepted it. They treat us like some kind of weird Kodiak quirk. Their dad, who is two people, they make jokes about it sometimes. Dark humor to cope with something impossible. But we never speak to each other. Never make eye contact for more than a second. Because I think we both know the truth. We both know that if we acknowledge each other directly, if we try to confront what is happening, one of us will cease to exist. Not die, just stop being real, fade back into whatever shadow we came from. So we maintain the stalemate. Both living half-lives, both pretending the other doesn't exist. Both being Thomas Mercer in shifts and fragments, never quite whole, never quite real. And we done. That's the thing nobody talks about. Linda is getting older. I can see it. Gray hair, lines around her eyes. But when I look in the mirror, I see the same face I saw 3 years ago. Unchanged, frozen. And I know he sees the same thing. We're stuck, locked in this moment, this impossible situation. Two versions of one man, existing in superposition, unable to collapse into a single reality. And I don't know if it will ever end. If one of us will eventually fade. If we'll all be stuck like this forever, watching our family age and die while we remain unchanged, eternal, neither fully real nor fully false. Sometimes I think about leaving, just walking away, let him have the life. But I can't, because it's my life, my family, my identity. And I know he feels the same way. So we stay, both of us, silent, watching, waiting for something that might never come. Story 2. Shadow that freezes. I watched my best friend get frozen alive by something that shouldn't exist. And the ice that killed him was so clear I could see the terror in his eyes for 3 full minutes before he finally stopped blinking. My name is Jake Brennan. I am a bush pilot. Flying supply runs out of Fairbanks to remote villages across the interior. 20 years doing this job. Thousands of hours in the air over some of the most unforgiving terrain on the planet. I've seen weird weather, strange lights. Once, I swear I saw a wolf the size of a grizzly. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered last February on a routine flight to Fort Yukon. I wasn't supposed to take a passenger. The Cessna was loaded heavy with medical supplies and mail. But Ray Hutchins showed up at the hangar an hour before departure, desperate to get north. His sister was sick. Pneumonia. The clinic in Fort Yukon had antibiotics, but she needed family. He offered me $500 cash. I said yes. We took off at noon into a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Temperature was pushing 30 below, but the weather was clear. Perfect flying conditions. Ray sat in the co-pilot seat, clutching a duffel bag, nervous energy radiating off him. He'd never flown in a small plane before. Kept asking questions. How high are we? How fast? What happens if the engine quits? I gave him the standard reassurances. Tried to keep it light. About 40 minutes into the flight, crossing over the White Mountains, I noticed something wrong with the light. The sun was still bright, but shadows on the snow below looked darker than they should. Deeper, like they had substance. Wait, Ray saw it too. Asked if there was a storm coming. I checked the instruments. Barometric pressure stable. No weather alerts. But that wrongness in the light was getting worse. The shadows were spreading, growing, moving in ways shadows shouldn't move. Then the temperature gauge started dropping. Fast. We went from -30 to -50 in less than a minute. Ice began forming on the windscreen. On the wings, the engine started running rough. I pushed the throttle forward, gaining altitude, trying to get above whatever atmospheric anomaly we hit. That's when I saw it below us. A shadow crossing the snow, but it wasn't cast by anything. No clouds, no mountains, no objects. Just a shadow moving across the white landscape like a living thing. And everywhere it touched, the world changed. Trees exploded, the sap inside freezing so fast the expansion shattered the trunks. A small stream I'd flown over 100 times was suddenly white, solid, frozen in an instant, and the shadow kept moving, kept spreading, heading northeast at impossible speed. Ray was gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white, asking what was happening. What that thing was, I didn't have answers. Just tried to keep the plane level as ice accumulated on every surface. The Cessna was getting heavy, sluggish. We were losing altitude. I made the decision to land. There was a frozen lake 3 miles ahead. Big enough, flat enough, better than crashing into the trees. I lined up the approach, fighting the controls as ice threw off the aerodynamics. Ray was praying, actually praying, words I hadn't heard since my mother's funeral. We hit the ice hard, too hard. The landing gear couldn't take it, collapsed on impact. The Cessna slid sideways across the lake surface, metal screaming, and finally stopped 200 feet from the shore. We were alive, shaken but alive. I checked Ray over, no injuries, checked myself, bruised ribs but nothing broken. The plane was done though. Crumpled landing gear, damaged prop. We weren't flying out of there. I grabbed the emergency kit from behind the seat. Satellite phone, Flares, emergency blanket, basic survival gear. Told Ray we hike to the shore and wait for rescue. I already triggered the ELT. Search and rescue would have our position. We just needed to stay warm and stay put. But when we opened the door and stepped onto the ice, the temperature hit us like a physical blow. It wasn't just cold. It was wrong cold. The kind that goes through every layer of clothing instantly. That makes your lungs burn with every breath. The thermometer on my watch read -78. Impossible. Even in interior Alaska in February, it doesn't get that cold. We started moving toward shore, fast as we could without running, because running in that cold would shred our lungs. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. Ice was forming in my beard, on my eyelashes. Ray was gasping beside me, struggling. We made it maybe 50 feet before I saw the shadow again. It was on the far side of the lake, a darkness moving across the white ice. No source, no explanation, just pure shadow flowing like oil, and everything it touched turned to ice. Not the normal ice of the frozen lake. This was different, crystal clear, perfect, like glass, and it was coming toward us. I grabbed Ray and we ran. Survival instinct overriding caution. Our boots hammering on the ice. Lungs screaming. The shore was close. Maybe 150 feet. Trees. Cover. Somewhere to hide from that impossible thing. But the shadow was faster. It swept across the lake surface like a wave. I could hear it now. A sound like wind but deeper. Subsonic. Felt in the bones rather than heard. And the temperature was still dropping. -80. -90. Cold beyond measurement. Ray fell. His foot hit a rough patch and he went down hard. I grabbed for him, but the shadow was already there. It flowed over him like water, like ink, and where it touched him, he froze. Not slowly, instantly. A shell of ice formed around his body so fast I could see the process. Could see the moisture in his clothes crystallize. His skin turned white. His eyes go wide with terror as he realized what was happening. The ice was perfectly clear, like he'd been encased in glass. I could see every detail. His face, his open mouth, his eyes still moving, still alive, still aware as the cold penetrated deeper. I stood there frozen myself, not by ice but by horror, by the impossibility of what I was watching. Ray was trying to scream. I could see his throat working, his eyes pleading, but no sound came out. Just that terrible silence in his living body trapped in crystal. The shadow kept moving, kept spreading. It was going to reach me in seconds. I forced myself to move, stumbled backward, fell, crawled across the ice toward shore as that darkness swept closer. I made it to the trees with maybe 10 feet to spare. The shadow stopped at the edge of the lake. Didn't to fall onto land. Just hung there, a wall of darkness and impossible cold. And in its depths I saw shapes, suggestions of forms, things that might have been faces, might have been hands, reaching, grasping. I stayed in those trees for 3 hours, too terrified to move, watching the shadow, watching Ray frozen on the lake. His eyes had finally stopped moving after those first awful minutes. But I could still see him perfectly. Could see every detail of his face locked in that final expression of terror. The shadow finally retreated as the sun started to set. It flowed back across the lake the way it had come, moving northeast, leaving behind a trail of ice so clear it looked like glass. And Ray, still frozen, still visible, a statue of a man in his final moment of life. Search and rescue found me after dark. Hypothermic, delirious. They got me to the hospital in Fairbanks. Treated me for frostbite and exposure. Asked what happened to Ray Hutchins. I told them the truth. Every word. They thought I was hallucinating. Oxygen deprivation. Trauma. The doctors showed me brain scans. Said I experienced significant stress. That my memories of the event were unreliable. But they sent a team out to recover Ray's body. And what they found matched my story exactly. He was still frozen in that crystal clear ice. Perfectly preserved. So clear they could see every detail. The coroner said it was the strangest case he'd ever seen. The ice had formed so fast and so uniformly it was almost like glass. Ray had frozen from the outside in. His skin and muscle first. His organs last. He'd been alive for several minutes inside that frozen shell. They asked me how it could have happened. I told them about the shadow. They said that was impossible. Shadow's done to have temperature. Done to have substance. Done to kill people. But I know what I saw. And I'm not the only one. I started digging into old records, talking to elders in the interior villages. There are stories going back hundreds of years about a shadow that brings killing cold. The Athabascan people have a name for it. They say it is not a thing but an absence. A gap in reality where warmth goes to die. where the cold of the void between stars leaks through into our world. The stories say it appears during the darkest part of winter, that it moves across the land seeking warmth, seeking life, and anything it touches becomes part of it, frozen, preserved, trapped forever in crystal ice. I found 7 documented cases in the past 50 years. People found frozen and impossibly clear ice. Animals, even a whole dog team once, frozen mid-run, preserved so perfectly they looked alive. All of them in the interior, all in February, all on days when the temperature dropped far below what weather stations recorded. The aviation authority grounded me, said I was unfit to fly until I completed psychiatric evaluation. My insurance company fought paying out for the crashed plane, said pilot error, negligence. I lost my license, lost my business, lost everything, but I don't care about any of that. What keeps me awake is knowing that thing is still out there, still moving through the interior every winter, still looking for warmth, for life, and I wonder how many others have seen it. How many have run from that impossible shadow? How many didn't make it to the trees in time? I live in Anchorage now, as far south as I can get and still be in Alaska. But even here, on the coldest winter nights, I sometimes see shadows that look too dark, that move wrong, and I remember his eyes behind that crystal ice, still aware, still terrified, and I wonder if some part of him is still in there, still trapped, still frozen in that moment forever. The shadow is real. It is out there right now, waiting for the next February cold snap, waiting to flow across the snow and ice, waiting to find someone alone and far from shelter. And when it does, it'll freeze so fast they won't even have time to understand what is happening. It will just be trapped, preserved, another perfect statue in crystal clear ice, warning anyone who finds them about the thing that shouldn't to exist but does. Story 3. Zero checkpoint. I crossed a checkpoint during the Iditarod that doesn't to exist on any official map, and the stamp it left on my chest is still burning 6 months later. My name is Marcus Webb. I am 43 years old, a veteran musher from Wasilla, and I run the Iditarod 11 times. I know every checkpoint, every mile marker, every dangerous stretch of that 1,000-mile race from Anchorage to Nome. I've survived storms that killed other mushers. I've been pushed through exhaustion that should have killed me. I thought I'd seen everything Alaska could throw at a man and his dogs. But on March 14th of this year, between the Rainy Pass and Ron checkpoints, I found something that wasn't supposed to be there. A place the race officials refuse to acknowledge. A checkpoint that only appears when conditions are at their worst. When the whiteout is so complete you can see your lead dog. When the cold drops so low your breath freezes before it leaves your mouth. When you alone on the trail with nothing but howling wind and endless white in every direction. That's when zero checkpoint appears. And if you unlucky enough to stop there, if you let them stamp your bib, you become something else. Something that I assume isn't quite alive anymore. Something that burns from the inside out. The storm hit without warning on the afternoon of March 13th. One moment I had clear visibility across the Alaska range. The next, the world disappeared into a wall of white. Wind speeds jumped from 15 to 60 miles per hour in minutes. Temperature plummeted from 0 to 30 below. My GPS went haywire. My headlamp was useless. I couldn't see the trail markers. Couldn't see my wheel dogs. Could barely see my lead dog Kodiak just 15 feet ahead of me. I should have stopped, should have hunkered down and waited out the storm. But I was in 4th place, running my best Iditarod ever. And I wanted to maintain my position. Stupidity and ambition, the combination that kills mushers every year. So I kept going, trusting Kodiak to follow the trail even when I couldn't see it. We pushed through the whiteout for 6 hours. My dogs were exhausted. I was hypothermic. My face mask had frozen solid with ice from my breath. I lost all sensation in my fingers and toes. But quitting wasn't an option. Not when I was this close to a top 5 finish. Not after training for 2 years and spending $30,000 to get to this moment. That is when I saw the lights. Through the swirling snow, maybe 200 yards ahead. Yellow lights, the warm glow of buildings. A checkpoint. Had to be Ron. I made it through the worst stretch. My dogs could rest. I could get warm. We'd be okay. I urged the team forward. Kodiak picked up speed, sensing shelter ahead. The lights grew brighter. I could make out structures now. 3 buildings arranged in a U shape around a central area. Exactly like the official checkpoints. Relief flooded through me. We were safe. But as we got closer, Something felt wrong. The buildings looked too old. The wood was weathered gray, like structures that had been abandoned for decades. The lights in the windows flickered irregularly, not like electric lights. More like oil lamps or candles. And there was no sound. No generators running. No voices. No other dog teams. Just silence beneath the howling wind. I pulled my team into the central area and called out. My voice was swallowed by the storm. I set my snow hook and walked toward the largest building. The door was ajar. Warm air poured out, carrying a smell that made my stomach turn. Something burning. Something organic. Like meat left too long on a fire. Inside, a single figure sat behind a desk. The checkpoint official was dressed in race gear from another era. Heavy wool coat, fur hat with ear flaps, boots that looked handmade. But his face was wrong. Too smooth, too pale, like wax. His eyes were dark, not brown or black, just dark, like looking into empty sockets. He didn't blink, didn't move, just sat there watching me with those void-like eyes. On the desk in front of him was a stamp and an ink pad. Old-fashioned, the kind you see in a museum. Next to it was a clipboard with a single sheet of paper. At the top, in faded typewriter font, it said 0 checkpoint. Below that was a list of names, maybe 30 names, all of them scratched out, all of them illegible except for the dates beside them. Dates going back to 1978, the second year of the Iditarod. The official gestured to the clipboard. The movement was jerky, mechanical, like a puppet on strings. He wanted me to sign in. Standard checkpoint procedure. Every musher signs in and out. Gets their bib stamped to prove they passed through. I should have turned around. Should have run back to my sled and gotten the hell out of there. But I was so cold, so tired, and some part of my brain, the part that had been running on autopilot for 6 hours, just went through the motions. I picked up the pen and signed my name. The official's mouth stretched into something that might have been a smile. Too wide, too many teeth. He picked up the stamp, pressed it into the ink pad, and reached for my bib number pinned to my chest. That's when I noticed his hands. They were burned, completely. The skin was black and cracked, with red light showing through the fissures like hot coals. When he touched the stamp to my bib, I felt heat. Incredible heat. It burned through my layers of clothing instantly, seared into my chest. I screamed and stumbled backward, clawing at my jacket. The official just sat there, still smiling, still watching with those empty eyes. The stamp mark on my chest was glowing. I could see it through my shirt. A circular burn in the shape of the official Iditarod stamp, but wrong. The design was distorted. The text was backwards. And it was hot, so hot I thought my chest was going to catch fire. I ran, burst out of the building, tore the snow hook free, and screamed at my dogs to run. Kodiak didn't need encouragement. He sensed something wrong with that place. The whole team bolted. We flew out of that checkpoint faster than we entered it. Behind us, I heard something that wasn't quite laughter. A sound like wind through dead trees, like breathing through a collapsed lung. I didn't look back, just kept the dogs running until the lights disappeared into the whiteout behind us. We ran for another 3 hours. When the storm finally cleared, we were approaching the actual Ron checkpoint. The real one, with modern buildings and generators and other mushers and race officials who looked like actual human beings. I signed in, got my bib stamped. The official, a woman named Sarah who I did known for years, looked at me with concern. Asked if I was okay. I told her I had a rough run through the storm. She nodded, told me 6 other mushers had scratched, said conditions had been the worst she'd seen in 20 years. I didn't mention the other checkpoint, didn't mention the burn on my chest, just took care of my dogs, forced down some food, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't. The burn was getting worse, hotter, and when I pulled up my shirt to look at it, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The stamp mark was changing. The distorted design was becoming clearer, and I could read the text now. It didn't say Iditarod. It said something else, something in a language I didn't recognize. Angular symbols that hurt to look at directly. And the mark was growing, spreading across my chest like a stain, like an infection. I dropped out of the race the next morning. First time I ever scratched. Flew back to Anchorage and went straight to a hospital. The doctors couldn't explain the burn. Said it looked like a brand, like someone had pressed a red hot metal stamp against my skin. But the edges were too precise, too clean, and the tissue beneath the burn was wrong, damaged in ways that didn't match any known type of burn injury. They took biopsies, Ran tests. Found nothing. The burn wasn't infected. Wasn't healing. Wasn't getting worse. Just stayed constant. Hot and painful and always glowing faintly in the dark. I could cover it with clothing, but I could always feel it. A constant burning presence in my chest. A reminder of something I encountered that shouldn't exist. I started researching, looking for other mushers who might have had similar experiences. Found nothing official, but in online forums and private Facebook groups, I found whispers. Stories shared in confidence. Mushers who seen strange things during whiteouts. Checkpoints that didn't match their maps. Officials who didn't seem quite human. One retired musher from Nome sent me a private message. Said he encountered zero checkpoint in 1993. Said he refused to let the official stamp his bib. Said he watched from hiding as the next musher to arrive accepted the stamp. Said that musher's team was found the next day, sled abandoned, dogs running loose on the trail. The musher was never found, officially listed as lost to the wilderness. But this retired musher swears he saw something else. Said he saw the missing musher walking back into zero checkpoint on his own. Walking with jerky, puppet-like movements. Skin pale as wax, eyes dark and empty. Said the missing musher had become one of them. The checkpoint officials. The things that run zero checkpoint. The things that mark mushers and claim them and turn them into something else. I compared notes with 3 other mushers who encountered the place. All of us have the burn. All of us dropped out of our races immediately after. All of us have experienced the same progression. The mark spreading. The heat increasing. The dreams starting. Because that is the worst part. The dreams. Every night, I'm back at zero checkpoint. But I am not arriving. I am working there. I am sitting behind that desk with the stamp and the clipboard. And mushers are coming in. One by one. Desperate for shelter. For warmth. For a place to rest. And I am stamping their bibs. Marking them, claiming them, and I can feel their terror as the burn sears into their flesh. Can feel their confusion as they run back into the storm. Can feel their acceptance when they realize they were already becoming like me. The dreams are getting more vivid, more real. I am starting to lose time during the day. Hours disappear. I'll be at home in Wasilla and suddenly it is 6 hours later and I am somewhere else. Sometimes I am on the park's highway with no memory of driving there. Sometimes I am in Anchorage. Once I woke up in the Alaska range, miles from any road, standing in deep snow in my pajamas. The burn is spreading faster now. It has reached my shoulders, creeping up my neck, down my arms. The heat is constant, unbearable. I have stopped sleeping because the dreams have become indistinguishable from reality. I don't know anymore if I am a musher who encountered zero checkpoint or if I've always been one of the officials. If my entire life is just a dream I am having while sitting behind that desk, waiting for the next musher to arrive. 2 of the other mushers I've been in contact with have disappeared. Officially, they were missing persons. But I know where they went. I can feel them, in the dreams, sitting at desks in other buildings at zero checkpoint. Waiting, stamping, claiming. The 3rd musher killed himself last week. Left a note saying he couldn't stand the burning anymore. Saying he'd rather die than become one of them. I understand the impulse. The burn has reached my face now. I can see the mark creeping up my jaw when I look in mirrors. My skin is turning pale, waxy. My eyes are getting darker. I am running out of time. Soon I want to be Marcus Webb anymore. I'll be a checkpoint official at zero checkpoint. I'll sit behind a desk in that impossible place that only appears during the worst storms. And I'll wait for the next musher to stumble in from the whiteout. Desperate and cold and willing to accept anything that looks like safety. And I'll stamp their bib, mark them, claim them, and I'll run back into the storm carrying my burn. Carrying the seed of transformation that will slowly turn them into another official. Another puppet manning another desk in that place between reality and nightmare. The Iditarod will keep running. Mushers will keep pushing through whiteouts. And zero checkpoint will keep appearing, claiming 1 or 2 every few years. Just enough to maintain itself. Just enough to stay hidden. Because the race officials who do acknowledge the disappearances blame the wilderness. The cold, the storms. They never consider that something might be hunting mushers. Something that marks them and transforms them and adds them to its collection. I am writing this while I still can. While I still remember being human. The burn has reached my scalp now. I can feel my thoughts changing. Becoming simpler, more focused. All I think about is the stamp. The clipboard. The next musher who will arrive seeking shelter. If you ever run the Iditarod and you see lights during a whiteout, check your map. Check your GPS. Make absolutely sure you know which checkpoint you re-approaching, because zero checkpoint looks real until you re-inside, until you sign the clipboard, until you feel the stamp burning into your chest. And by then, it's too late. You remarked, claimed, and eventually you stop being whoever you were and become one of us. One of the officials. One of the things that wait in that impossible place. Forever stamping. Forever claiming. Forever burning. The mark just reached my eyes. I can feel them darkening. Emptying. Soon I want to see the world the way humans see it. I'll only see mushers. Only see potential stamps. Only see the next person I'll mark and claim and transform. I'm so cold now. Despite the burning. I'm so very cold. And I can hear the wind. The storm is coming again. The whiteout. The perfect conditions. And zero checkpoint is calling me back. Time to take my place behind the desk. Time to pick up the stamp. Time to wait for you. Story 4. Cursed film reel. I watched a film that should have stayed buried in the basement of the 4th Avenue Theater. And now I see that frost-covered face every time I close my eyes. I need to tell someone what was on that reel before it finds me again, before I become part of whatever nightmare it captured 70 years ago. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a film archivist, 44 years old, working for the Alaska Historical Society. In November 2023, I was called to the 4th Avenue Theater in Anchorage to catalog materials found during a renovation. The theater opened in 1947, a beautiful Art Deco building that had been the crown jewel of Alaskan entertainment before falling into disrepair. New owners were restoring it, and in the basement, behind a collapsed wall, they found boxes of old film reels. Most were commercial releases from the 50s and 60s. Nothing special, but one canister was different. Unmarked, sealed with wax that had hardened into black stone over the decades. The metal was corroded, covered in a frost pattern that should not have existed in a climate-controlled basement. When I touched it, the metal was ice cold, cold enough that my fingers stuck to it briefly before I pulled away. I should have left it sealed. Something about that canister felt wrong. But curiosity is an occupational hazard in my profession. I brought it back to my lab, carefully broke the wax seal, and opened it. Inside was a single reel of 16mm film, the stock brittle with age but surprisingly intact. No label, no documentation, just raw film waiting to tell whatever story it held. I loaded it onto my projector that evening after everyone else had gone home. The film was silent, black and white, grainy in the way all amateur footage from that era looked. It began with a slate showing a date, November 23, 1952. Below that, handwritten words I could barely make out. Chugach Survey Expedition Day 7. The first frame showed forest, dense Alaskan wilderness, birch and spruce trees heavy with snow. The camera moved through the woods, handheld, bouncing with each step. Someone was filming while walking, their breath visible in clouds that drifted past the lens. The footage had that documentary quality, like a nature expedition or geological survey. For the first few minutes, nothing seemed unusual. Trees, snow, occasional glimpses of mountains in the distance. The cameraman was alone, or at least no other people appeared in frame. He walked for what felt like hours of real time compressed into minutes of film, deeper and deeper into the wilderness. Then the trees started cracking. Not breaking, not falling, cracking, like gunshots echoing through the forest, sharp reports that made the camera jerk with each sound. I could see the cameraman spinning, trying to locate the source. The trees around him were splitting, vertical cracks appearing in the bark, spreading from base to crown. Ice was forming in the cracks, white and crystalline, spreading faster than should have been physically possible. The camera started moving faster. The footage became shaky, chaotic. The cameraman was running now, his breath coming in ragged gasps I could somehow hear despite the film having no audio. That should have been impossible. Silent film does not carry sound. But I heard it, breathing, footsteps crunching in snow, and underneath, a deeper sound. A grinding, like ice sheets moving against each other. More trees cracked. The sound grew deafening. Through the grainy footage, I could see the forest transforming. The cracks in the trees were spreading to the ground, spider webbing across the snow, creating geometric patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. The same patterns I had seen on the film canister. The same frost designs. The cameraman fell. The camera hit the ground, still rolling, showing a sideways view of the forest. Boots appeared in frame, running. Then they stopped. Slowly, the camera was picked up, and for a moment, I saw the cameraman, his reflection in a patch of ice. A young man, maybe 30, with a beard and a thick parka. His eyes were wide with terror. He turned the camera forward again and started filming something in the trees ahead. At first, I could not make out what I was seeing. The footage was too dark, too grainy. But as he zoomed in, as he focused the lens with shaking hands, the image became clear. Something was standing between the trees. Something tall and impossibly thin, its body composed entirely of ice and frost. It had a vaguely human shape, but stretched and wrong, with limbs too long and joints that bent in directions that violated anatomy. And its face, God, its face. The face was made of hoarfrost, those delicate ice crystals that form on cold surfaces. But this frost was thick, layered, creating features that were both beautiful and horrifying. Eyes like frozen lakes, a mouth that was just a crack in the ice, opening and closing slowly. And the expression, if you could call it that, was one of hunger and ancient patience. The thing moved toward the camera, not walking, gliding. Its feet did not touch the ground. It flowed through the forest like smoke, and wherever it passed, the trees cracked and split and became covered in that same frost pattern. The temperature around it must have been unimaginable because I could see the air itself crystallizing, creating a halo of ice particles that caught the weak sunlight. The cameraman ran again. The footage became a blur of trees and snow and sky. But I could still hear that grinding sound. Growing closer. Could still hear the trees exploding as the thing pursued him. The film jumped and skipped, damaged sections creating gaps in the narrative. When the image stabilized again, the cameraman had stopped. He was no longer running. He had turned the camera on himself, holding it at arm's length, filming his own face. And I could see the change happening to him in real time. Frost was forming on his skin, starting at his extremities and spreading inward. His fingers turned white, then blue, then crystalline. Ice grew from his beard, spreading across his cheeks. His eyes were still human, still terrified, but around them, frost was creating patterns, the same geometric designs that covered everything else. He was trying to say something. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Or maybe there was sound that the film could not capture. But I understood what he was trying to communicate. A warning, a plea. Do not come looking for me. Do not try to find this place. Whatever is here, it takes people and makes them part of the cold. Part of the eternal winter that exists in places humans should never go. The frost covered his face completely. For a moment, the image showed nothing but white, crystalline patterns filling the frame. Then, slowly, the frost cleared, and I saw the thing looking directly into the camera. The frost face, the creature that had been pursuing him, but now it wore the cameraman's features, had absorbed them, had added them to its own impossible structure. The film ended abruptly. The screen went white. I sat in my darkened lab, my hands shaking, my mind trying to process what I had just seen. This was not a horror movie, not a fabrication. The film stock was authentic. The degradation patterns were consistent with 70-year-old footage. And something about the raw terror in that cameraman, his eyes, the genuine panic in his movements, convinced me this was real. I researched the date on the slate, November 23, 1952. I found records of a geological survey team that had gone into the Chugach Mountains that year. 4 men. They were supposed to return after 2 weeks. Only 3 came back. The 4th man, a cameraman named Daniel Frost, had vanished. His body was never found. Daniel Frost. The name felt like a sick joke, given what I had seen on the film. The official report said he had likely fallen through thin ice or been taken by wildlife. But the 3 survivors had quit their jobs immediately after returning. All 3 moved out of Alaska within 6 months. And in the archived newspaper reports from that time, I found a strange detail that made my blood run cold. One of the survivors had given a brief interview where he described the last time he saw Daniel. He said they had split up to cover more ground, and when they went looking for him after he failed to return to camp, they found his camera equipment scattered in the snow. But the area around it was wrong. The trees were cracked open. The ground was covered in patterns that looked like frost but felt warm to the touch. And there was a smell like ozone and something older, something that reminded him of walking into a deep cave. They had fled without recovering the camera, left it in the forest. But somehow, years later, it had ended up in the basement of the 4th Avenue Theater. Someone had found it. Someone had developed the film. And someone had sealed it in that canister with wax and left it to be forgotten. I made the mistake of trying to watch the film a second time. I needed to verify what I had seen, to document it properly, to convince myself I had not imagined the horror of it. But when I loaded the reel again, something had changed. The film still showed the forest, still showed the cameraman running. But now, in the background of every shot, I could see additional figures. Other people made of frost, standing motionless between the trees, watching. They had not been there in the first viewing. I was certain of that. But now they filled the forest. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All with that same crystalline structure. All wearing faces I could almost recognize. And at the end, when the frost creature looked into the camera, it held up something in its hand. A piece of paper, modern paper, with writing on it that I could just barely make out. My name, Marcus Webb. And today, this date, I destroyed the projector, smashed the reel, burned the film in my apartment sink until nothing remained but melted plastic and ash. But it did not matter. That night, I woke up to find frost patterns on my bedroom window. The same geometric designs from the film. And when I looked closer, I could see faces in the frost. Daniel Frost, the other survey team members. Dozens of other people I did not recognize. All of them trapped in crystalline structures. All of them watching me. The patterns are spreading. They appear on every cold surface now. My bathroom mirror, the windshield of my car, the condensation on my water glass. And each time, the faces are clearer, more defined. They are trying to communicate something, trying to warn me or invite me or prepare me for what is coming. I researched the 4th Avenue Theater's history more carefully. I found that in 1953, the year after Daniel Frost disappeared, 3 members of the theater's staff vanished during a cold snap. Their bodies were found in the basement, frozen solid despite the room being heated. The official cause of death was a catastrophic heating failure. But the janitor who found them said their faces were covered in frost patterns and their eyes were open, staring at something no one else could see. The theater has a history of cold, unexplained temperature drops, equipment failures, and people going missing in the basement, always during the winter, always when the temperature outside drops below zero. The building sits on top of something, or something visits it, something that exists in the deep cold, in the spaces where winter becomes a physical presence rather than just a season. I am writing this because the frost is getting closer. It appears now even when there is no cold surface to form on. It materializes in the air, crystallizing water vapor, creating those geometric patterns that hang suspended like frozen spiderwebs. And in the patterns, I see the faces more clearly now. Daniel Frost is there, but he is no longer alone. All the missing people from the theater, all the survey team members, and new faces, recent faces, people I recognize from the news. Missing persons from Anchorage, hikers who vanished in the mountains. All of them part of the frost now. All of them watching, waiting. The thing from the film is real. It exists in the coldest places, in the deepest winter, in the forests where humans should not venture. And it collects people, not their bodies, their essence, their faces, their identities. It preserves them in frost and ice, adding them to its impossible structure, building something that grows larger every year. The film was not meant to be found. It was meant to stay sealed, buried, forgotten. But I opened it. I watched it. And by watching, I became part of its story. The frost creature knows me now, has marked me. And soon, very soon, when the temperature drops low enough, it will come for me the way it came for Daniel Frost 70 years ago. I will be running through a forest that does not appear on any map. I will hear trees cracking like gunshots. I will see that terrible frost face emerging from the winter itself. And I will become another pattern in the ice, another face watching from the cold, another warning that no one will heed until they make the same mistake I did and look at something that should have remained unseen. The 4th Avenue Theater is being renovated. They are opening it to the public again. And in that basement, in the walls behind the collapsed section, there are more canisters, more films, more warnings sealed away. Do not open them. Do not watch them. Because some stories are not meant to be told. Some horrors are best left in the dark and the cold where they belong. Still with me in the dark? Good. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell. It keeps you close to the fire while we wander deeper into Alaska's shadows. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes the whispers travel farther than you think. Story 5. Permafrost prisoners. I was part of the construction crew that found 2 frozen bodies in Fairbanks that were still getting colder 90 years after they died. And what we disturbed that day in the permafrost is still hunting for warmth in ways that defy every law of nature. My name is Marcus Webb. I've worked construction in Alaska for 17 years. Foundations mostly. Digging into ground that has been frozen solid for thousands of years. It is brutal work, but it pays well. And I'm good at it. I know how to read the permafrost. Know when it's stable and when it's not. Know what to expect when we break through those frozen layers. Mammoth bones, ancient vegetation, sometimes artifacts from early settlers. Normal stuff for Alaska. What we found last September was anything but normal. We were breaking ground for a new hotel on the south side of Fairbanks. Commercial district. Been developed and redeveloped a dozen times over the past century. Nothing special about the location. Just another construction site. We already excavated down about 8 feet when my excavator bucket hit something solid. Not rock, not ice. Something that gave a little but didn't T-break. I shut down the machine and climbed into the pit. The temperature drops fast when you get below the active layer, down into the permafrost that never thaws. Even in September, it was maybe 20 degrees down there. Cold enough to see your breath. Cold enough that the moisture in the air formed tiny ice crystals that caught the light. What I hit was fabric. Heavy wool, dark, preserved perfectly by the frozen ground. I brushed away the dirt and ice and saw a shoulder. Then an arm. Then a face staring up at me through a thin layer of frost. The eyes were open. That's what got me. Wide open, staring. The expression wasn't peaceful. It was terror. Pure, frozen terror that had been locked in place for God knows how long. I called my supervisor. He called the police. Within an hour, we had a forensics team on site and the whole area was cordoned off. They carefully excavated around the body. And that is when they found the second one. 2 men, lying side by side, both dressed in clothing from the 1920s. Heavy coats, wool pants, leather boots that had somehow survived the decades frozen. And their hands were bound behind their backs with rope. Old rope, the kind made from natural fiber that nobody has used since before World War II. The forensic anthropologist was excited. She kept saying this was an incredible find, a perfectly preserved crime scene from the gold rush era. She photographed everything, took samples, started speculating about who these men were and how they ended up buried in the permafrost. But there was something wrong, something none of us wanted to acknowledge at first. The bodies were too cold, even for permafrost. The temperature down there should have been maybe 25 degrees, cold enough to preserve organic material indefinitely. But when they took readings from the bodies themselves, the thermometers showed -15, -20, and dropping. The coroner who came to supervise the removal kept checking his equipment. Said it must be malfunctioning, but every thermometer gave the same reading. The bodies were colder than the ground around them. Significantly colder, and getting colder by the hour. They transported them to the morgue that evening. I should have gone home. Should have put it out of my mind and moved on. But something about those open eyes, that expression of terror, it stuck with me. I found myself driving to the hospital, asking questions. The morgue assistant was a friend of mine. He let me see the preliminary report. Cause of death was listed as exposure. Hypothermia. The men had frozen to death. But here is what didn't make sense. The coroner estimated they'd been in the ground since the mid-1920s based on the clothing and the rope. Nearly 100 years. But their body temperature was still dropping. After being removed from the permafrost. After being brought into a climate-controlled facility. They were getting colder. The report noted something else. Tissue samples showed ice crystal formation that was still active. Still growing, like the freezing process hadn't stopped. Like it was ongoing even though the men had been dead for a century. I went back to the site the next morning. Something was pulling at me. A feeling I couldn't shake. The pit where we found the bodies was still open, protected by tarps and police tape. I told the security guard I needed to check the excavator. He waved me through. Standing at the edge of that pit, I felt cold radiating up from below. Not normal cold, wrong cold. The kind that seems to come from somewhere deeper than the ground. I climbed down, told myself I was just being thorough, making sure we hadn't missed anything. The impression where the bodies had been was still visible. 2 man-shaped depressions in the frozen earth, and they were frost-covered. Fresh frost, even though we were in a heated work zone with tarps blocking the wind. Ice was forming in those depressions. Growing, spreading. I touched it. Stupid, I know. But I had to understand. The frost was so cold it burned. I jerked my hand back and saw my fingerprint left in the ice. And in that fingerprint, the frost seemed to move, to flow, like it was alive somehow. That night, the morgue had a power failure. Backup generators kicked in, but for about 20 minutes, the climate control was down. When staff checked on the bodies, they found ice had spread across the entire examination table, covered the walls, the ceiling. Everything in a 10-foot radius of those two frozen men was encased in frost. And their body temperature had dropped to -40. The hospital moved them to a specialized freezer unit, the kind used for long-term specimen storage, set to maintain -80 degrees. The only way to stop them from getting colder was to put them somewhere even colder than they were trying to become. I started researching, spent every evening digging through historical records, trying to find out who these men were, why they'd been buried with their hands bound, what had happened to them. I found a newspaper article from February 1924. Two prospectors had gone missing north of Fairbanks, James Mackenzie and Robert Healy. They'd been working a claim near Cleary Summit. When they didn't return, a search party went out. Found their camp abandoned. No signs of violence. No indication of where they'd gone. Just vanished into the winter. But there was a follow-up article from March. A trapper reported seeing two men wandering in the wilderness. Said they looked lost, confused. He tried to approach them, but they ran. He said something about them wasn't right. They moved wrong, and the temperature around them dropped whenever they got close. The trapper's report was dismissed as frontier superstition. But now I wondered, what if those men hadn't vanished? What if something had happened to them? Something that changed them, made them carry cold in their bodies like a disease. I found one more article from April 1924. A small piece buried in the back pages. Two frozen bodies found near Esther, hands bound. The article said local authorities determined they'd gotten lost in a storm and died of exposure. Someone had tied them up to prevent them from wandering in delirium. The bodies were buried in the permafrost because the ground was too frozen to dig a proper grave. But that didn't explain the rope, the binding, the looks of terror on their faces. It didn't explain why someone would bury them 8 feet deep instead of waiting for spring thaw. Unless whoever buried them wanted to make sure they stayed down, stayed frozen, stayed contained. 3 days after we found them, one of the forensic technicians who handled the bodies got sick. Started complaining about feeling cold. Not sick cold, deep cold, the kind that no amount of heat could touch. His core temperature started dropping. Doctors couldn't explain it, couldn't stop it. They put him in a warming unit, but his temperature kept falling. Then his fingers started turning white. Not frostbite, something else. The tissue was crystallizing, turning to ice from the inside out. He was freezing alive in a heated hospital room. They tried everything. Warm fluids, heat lamps. Nothing worked. Within 48 hours he was gone. Frozen solid, body temperature at -35. And after he died, his body kept getting colder. 2 more people who'd been in contact with the original bodies got sick. Same symptoms, same impossible cold spreading through their bodies. The CDC got involved. Quarantine protocols, hazmat suits. They moved everyone who'd been exposed to an isolation facility. I was one of them. I did touch that frost at the excavation site. Had direct contact. They put me in a room with constant monitoring. Took my temperature every hour. Watched for signs of infection. Because that's what they were calling it now. An infection. Something in those bodies that could transfer. Something that carried cold like a virus. The working theory was some kind of extremophile bacteria. Organisms adapted to live in permafrost that could somehow alter human metabolism. Make bodies generate cold instead of heat. But I knew better. I'd seen the articles. Known about the trapper's report. This wasn't T-bacteria. This was something older. Something that had infected Mackenzie and Healy back in 1924. Something they encountered in the wilderness that got inside them. Made them into carriers. And when the cold killed them, it didn't stop. Just kept spreading. Kept growing. Locked in their frozen flesh for 90 years until we dug them up and let it out. I was in isolation for 2 weeks before they cleared me. My temperature stayed normal. No crystallization. No symptoms. They said I was lucky that whatever mechanism caused the infection hadn't triggered in me. They sent me home with instructions to report any unusual coldness immediately. But I still feel it sometimes. Late at night when it is quiet. A cold spot deep in my chest that shouldn't be there. And I wonder if I'm really clear, or if I'm just incubating. If someday that cold will spread through me the way it spread through those technicians, the way it spread through Mackenzie and Healy a century ago. The bodies are still in that freezer, still getting colder. The CDC want to release them, want to allow burial. They restudying them, trying to understand how human tissue can continue to freeze long after death, how cold can propagate like an infection. They haven't found answers. I don't to work construction anymore. To bring myself to dig into the permafrost knowing what might be down there. How many other bodies might be buried deep? How many other carriers locked away by people who knew the only way to contain the cold was to keep it frozen? Keep it buried. Keep it away from the living. Because the permafrost is melting now. Climate change, rising temperatures. All across Alaska the ground is thawing, releasing things that have been locked away for thousands of years. And I lie awake wondering what else is down there waiting. What other infections? What other impossible cold that turns human bodies into frozen weapons? And I wonder if we've already released enough of it to spread, to infect, to turn us all into permafrost prisoners carrying winter inside our flesh, colder than death, colder than ice, colder than the frozen earth that couldn't to hold it forever. Story 6. Silent night. I lost my voice on December 21st, 1991, along with every other person on St. Paul Island. And what we wrote on paper during those 24 hours of silence should have stayed buried forever. My name is Daniel Kovac. I am 62 years old, a former commercial fisherman who lived on the Pribilof Islands for 37 years. St. Paul is a remote speck in the Bering Sea, 200 miles from mainland Alaska, home to about 500 people who make their living from the ocean. It's isolated, brutal, the kind of place where you either love the solitude or it slowly drives you insane. But what happened during the silent night wasn't isolation madness. It was something else, something that descended on our island like a physical weight and took away the one thing that makes us human. Our ability to speak, our ability to scream. It started at exactly 3 a.m. on December 21st. I know the time because I was awake, checking my fishing gear in the garage, when I felt it arrive. The air pressure changed, suddenly, dramatically, like the atmosphere had gotten heavier, dense. My ears popped 3 times in rapid succession. The light bulb overhead flickered and dimmed, even though there was no storm, no reason for power fluctuations. And then the silence came, not the absence of sound. This was different. This was silence as a presence, as a thing. It pressed against my eardrums from the outside. It filled the space around me like water filling a tank. I could feel it touching my skin, sliding into my nose and mouth and ears. Invasive, suffocating. I tried to call out to my wife, Sarah, asleep in the house. Opened my mouth, pushed air from my lungs, but no sound came out. Nothing, not even a whisper, not even the sound of breath moving past my vocal cords. The silence had gotten inside me, had wrapped itself around my throat and squeezed until there was nothing left but this crushing, absolute quiet. I ran into the house. Sarah was sitting up in bed, mouth open, face twisted in panic. She was trying to scream. I could see the effort in her neck muscles, in the way her chest heaved. But there was no sound. She grabbed her throat, eyes wide with terror, thinking she was having some kind of medical emergency. Thinking her airway had closed. Thinking she was dying. I tried to calm her down. Tried to mouth words. Tried to make any sound at all. Nothing worked. The silence was total, complete. And it wasn't just inside us anymore. The world outside had gone silent too. No wind. No ocean waves crashing against the rocks. No dogs barking. No hum of electrical equipment. Everything was muted, erased, like someone had hit a cosmic mute button on reality itself. I grabbed a pen and paper from the nightstand. Wrote, Ken. Titak. You too. Sarah snatched the pen from my hand and wrote back with shaking letters. What is happening to us? I had no answer. We got dressed and went outside. The street was filling with people. Our neighbors. All of them moving in eerie silence. All of them with the same expression of panic and confusion. Some were touching their throats. Others were gesturing wildly, trying to communicate. A few had already figured out to use paper and pens. Notes were being passed around. Questions without answers. By 4 a.m., the entire village had gathered at the community center. All 532 residents of St. Paul Island. Every single person unable to make a sound. We wrote on notepads, on napkins, on the backs of receipts. Trying to figure out what was happening. Trying to find someone, anyone, who could still speak. No one could. Not the adults. Not the children. Not even the babies. I watched an infant in his mother's arms, face red, mouth open in what should have been a wail. But there was no sound, just that crushing, watchful silence pressing down on all of us. The village council tried to maintain order, passed around sheets of paper, asked if anyone was having trouble breathing. Everyone shook their heads no. We could breathe fine, we just couldn't make sound. Our vocal cords had been stolen, erased, replaced with this terrible silence that seemed to be listening. Because that's what it felt like. The silence wasn't just present. It was aware, watching, waiting. I could feel its attention on me like a physical weight, like something invisible standing right behind me, leaning close, studying me with interest I couldn't see but definitely felt. One of the council members, a woman named Rita Strand, wrote a note in large letters and held it up for everyone to see. Does anyone else feel like something is watching us? Every hand in the room went up. That's when the real fear set in, because we all felt the same thing. All experienced the same oppressive sense of being observed by something vast and patient and completely alien. It wasn't just in the community center. People wrote about feeling it in their homes, on the streets, even inside their own heads. The silence had a presence, a consciousness, and it was studying us the way a scientist might study insects under glass. We tried everything to break the silence, shouted until our throats were raw and burning, even though no sound emerged. Banged pots and pans together, but they made no noise when they struck. Played the radio, but it produced only static that we felt as vibration rather than heard as sound. Even our footsteps made no sound. The silence had claimed everything, had wrapped the entire island in a bubble where sound couldn't exist. By dawn, the notes people were writing started to change. They became longer, more detailed, more disturbing. People weren't just describing the silence anymore. They were describing what the silence was showing them. A fisherman named Karl Petrov wrote 3 pages about memories that didn't belong to him. Detailed accounts of being a Russian sailor on a ship that sank in 1852. He described the cold water, the panic, the moment his lungs filled and everything went dark. He wrote that he could remember drowning, could remember dying, but these weren't his memories. He never drowned, never even been in serious danger on the water. Others wrote similar accounts. A teacher described being a native Aleut woman during the Russian occupation, watching her children taken away to be educated in Orthodox schools. A store clerk described being a seal hunter in the 1700s, clubbing pups on the rocks, the blood on his hands, the screams of the mothers. Memories that belonged to dead people, to history, to the island itself. The silence was feeding us the past, filling our heads with the experiences of everyone who had ever died on or near St. Paul Island. Thousands of deaths over thousands of years. Drownings and murders and slow starvation and disease. The silence contained all of it, stored all of it, and now it was downloading those memories into us. Sarah wrote a note describing her own death. Not her future death, her death in 1943, when she'd been a young woman named Anna who'd fallen through ice while retrieving water. She described the cold, the darkness, the way her lungs had burned. She wrote it all in perfect detail, even though Sarah had been born in 1965 and was very much alive. I started getting the memories too. I was a whaler in 1889, crushed between my boat and an iceberg. I was a missionary in 1823, dying of pneumonia in a cramped cabin. I was a Russian soldier in 1788, stabbed during a fight over a native woman. Each memory was complete, vivid, more real than my own past. I could feel the pain, the fear, the moment of death, over and over, dozens of deaths, maybe hundreds, all of them bleeding into my consciousness. By noon, people were breaking down. The accumulated weight of all those deaths, all those traumas, was too much. Some wrote notes saying they wanted to die, to escape the memories. Others just sat in corners, staring at nothing, overwhelmed by centuries of suffering compressed into their minds over the course of hours. The children were hit hardest. They didn't have enough life experience to contextualize what they were receiving. A 10-year-old boy wrote about being executed during a tribal conflict in the 1600s. A 7-year-old girl described being a baby who frozen to death in 1920. They were traumatized by deaths they never experienced, by lives they never lived. And through it all, the silence watched. I could feel it observing our reactions, studying how we process the memories, learning from our suffering. It was conducting some kind of experiment, using us as vessels for the dead. forcing us to carry the weight of every tragedy that had ever occurred on this rock in the middle of the Bering Sea. By evening, a pattern emerged in the notes people were writing. They all received different memories, different deaths, but they all shared one thing. Every person who died on St. Paul Island had died in silence. The drowned couldn't scream underwater. The frozen lost their voices before they lost consciousness. The murdered were silenced by their killers. The sick were too weak to cry out at the end. The island was a graveyard of silent deaths. And now their silence had accumulated, concentrated, become something with mass and presence and purpose. It had been building for centuries, absorbing every unheard scream, every unsaid goodbye, every final breath that made no sound. And on December 21st, 1991, it had finally become dense enough to manifest, to press down on the living and force us to experience what the dead had experienced, to make us silent too. As midnight approached, completing 24 hours of absolute quiet, the notes people were writing became desperate. Some wrote prayers, some wrote confessions, some wrote final messages to loved ones, convinced we'd never speak again, convinced the silence would keep us forever. I wrote to Sarah, "If we dawn, to get our voices back, I want you to know I love you. I always have, even if I can never say it out loud again." She wrote back, "The silence knows. It knows everything we never said, everything we kept inside. It is made of all the unspoken words." She was right. The silence wasn't just death. It was regret. All the things people had wanted to say but never did. All the apologies left unspoken. All the love left unexpressed. The silence was made of absence, of everything that should have been said but wasn't. And it had grown heavy enough to smother an entire island. At exactly 3 a.m. on December 22nd, 24 hours after it began, the silence lifted. It happened instantly. One moment the oppressive weight was crushing down on us. The next, it was gone. The atmosphere returned to normal. Sound came back. People started screaming, crying, shouting with relief and terror. The noise was overwhelming after a full day of nothing. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time. But the memories didn't leave. We all kept them. Every death we experienced during those 24 hours stayed with us. Sarah still remembers drowning as Anna in 1943. I still remember being crushed between boat and ice in 1889. The children still carry the deaths of children who came before them. The psychological impact was catastrophic. 37 people left the island within a month. The school had to bring in trauma counselors. The suicide rate spiked. 4 people took their own lives in the first year, unable to live with the weight of deaths that weren't theirs but felt more real than their own lives. The official explanation was mass hysteria, a shared delusion brought on by isolation and winter darkness. The medical authorities said they all convinced each other we couldn't speak, that the experience was psychological rather than physical. They dismissed the shared memories as confabulation, the mind filling in gaps with imagination. But I know what I felt. I know the silence was real, was physical, was aware, and I know it is still here, still accumulating, still growing heavier with every death on this island. It's been 33 years since the silent night, and sometimes I can still feel it pressing down. Not as heavy as before. Not yet, but getting there. Every year on December 21st, I wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding. I test my voice, make sure I can still speak, and I listen to the silence between sounds, waiting to feel that pressure building again. Waiting for it to become dense enough to manifest, to press down on St. Paul Island and claim our voices once more. Because I think it will come back. I think the silent night wasn't a one-time event. It was a warning, a preview. The silence is still here, still growing, still accumulating the weight of unspoken words and silent deaths. And one day, it will be heavy enough to last longer than 24 hours. Heavy enough to last forever. The island is quieter now. We don't talk as much as we used to. We say what needs to be said. We apologize quickly. We express love often, because we learned something during those 24 hours of forced silence. We learned that words matter, that sounds matter, that the ability to speak, to scream, to be heard, is precious. And we learned that silence isn't just the absence of sound. It is a presence, a thing that watches and waits and remembers every word that was never spoken, every cry that was never heard, every voice that was silenced before it could say what it needed to say. I am 62 now. I have maybe 20 years left if I'm lucky. And when I die, my death will add to the silence. My unspoken words, my regrets, my final breath, will all become part of that accumulating weight pressing down on St. Paul Island. And I wonder how many more deaths it will take, how many more silent endings before the silence becomes permanent, before it presses down on this island and never lifts, before St. Paul becomes a place where sound can't exist anymore, where 500 people live in eternal quiet, carrying the memories of thousands of dead, unable to scream, unable to speak, unable to do anything but write notes to each other in the crushing, watchful silence. I think about that every December 21st, and I test my voice. And I pray that when the silence comes back, it will still be willing to let us go after 24 hours. But I don't think it will. I think next time, the silence will keep us, and we will join all the others, all the deaths, all the unspoken words, all the weight, and St. Paul Island will become exactly what it has always been becoming. A place of absolute, eternal, watching silence, where the living and the dead exist together in the same crushing quiet, where no one can scream, where no one can speak, where everyone just writes and writes and writes, filling paper with words that the silence reads and absorbs and adds to its ever-growing mass. I can feel it happening. Even now, the silence is getting heavier. December 21st is coming again, and I wonder if this will be the year it doesn't let go. The year the silent night becomes permanent. Story 7. Ice that dreams. The ice core in my freezer is still pulsing, and every night when I sleep, I dream of a world on fire. I need to tell you what we found in the Juneau ice field before it wakes up completely, before those dreams become something more than dreams. My name is Dr. Sarah Blackwell. I am a glaciologist, 42 years old, and I have spent the last 15 years studying ice in some of the most remote places on Earth. Greenland, Antarctica, Alaska. Ice is supposed to be simple, frozen water, layers of compressed snow telling the story of ancient climates. Dead, inert, safe. But in August 2024, my team extracted something from the Juneau ice field that changed everything I thought I knew about ice and what might be sleeping inside it. We were drilling deep cores, trying to reconstruct climate patterns from the last ice age. Standard research. My team consisted of 5 people. Myself, 2 graduate students named Kevin and Maya, and 2 field technicians, Robert and Chen. We had been on the ice field for 3 weeks, living in tents, drilling dozens of cores, when we hit something unexpected at 2,000 feet. The drill bit struck resistance. Not rock, not a different density of ice. Something else. The equipment started behaving strangely. The sensors showed temperature fluctuations that made no sense. The ice around the drill site was negative 20 degrees Celsius, but the reading showed pockets of warmth deeper down, as if something was generating heat far below the frozen surface. We pulled up the core sample carefully. The ice was different from anything we had seen before. Most glacial ice is white or pale blue, filled with tiny air bubbles. This ice was clear, absolutely transparent, like glass. And as we laid it out on our examination table, we noticed something that made everyone step back. The ice was pulsing, not visibly. You could not see it moving, but if you put your hand near it, you could feel a rhythm. A faint throb, like a heartbeat, regular and slow, once every 5 seconds. Pulse, pause, pulse, pause, like something sleeping, like something alive. We ran every test we could with our field equipment. The ice was ancient, over 50,000 years old based on the depth we had extracted it from. But it contained no air bubbles, no impurities, nothing that normal glacial ice should have. And it was warm, not melting warm, but 5 degrees warmer than the surrounding ice, maintaining that temperature despite being exposed to freezing air. That night, I took the sample back to my tent, storing it in a portable freezer for transport back to the lab. I planned to document everything, to run more sophisticated tests, to figure out what we had found. But that night, something happened that I still cannot fully explain. I dreamed, not a normal dream, not the scattered nonsense of a sleeping mind. This was vivid, real, more real than reality. I was standing in a place I did not recognize, but I knew, somehow, that I was seeing Alaska. Except it was not frozen. It was burning. The sky was orange and red, filled with volcanic ash. The ground was black rock, still glowing with internal heat. Rivers of lava cut through the landscape, creating valleys that would one day become glaciers. And the heat was overwhelming, oppressive, like standing too close to a furnace. But I was not alone. Things moved in the heat. Massive shapes that swam through the lava like it was water. They had no form I could properly describe. They were liquid and solid at the same time, bodies of molten rock that flowed and reformed constantly. And they were aware, intelligent. I could feel their thoughts pressing against my mind, alien and vast and utterly beyond human comprehension. They were older than anything that had ever lived on Earth, older than life itself. They had existed in the planet, its infancy when the world was nothing but fire and liquid rock. And they had thrived in that heat, those beings of living magma, building civilizations and thoughts and dreams in temperatures that would vaporize any organic life. Then the cooling began. The Earth, its surface started to solidify. The heat that had sustained them began to fade, and they knew they were dying, that their world was ending, that the cold would eventually consume everything they were. So they did the only thing they could. They went to sleep, deep sleep, frozen in the ice that would eventually cover their world, waiting, dreaming, hoping that someday the heat would return. I woke up gasping, my tent somehow stifling despite the freezing temperature outside. The dream lingered with perfect clarity. I could still feel the heat, still see those massive shapes moving through the lava. And when I checked on the ice core, I found it was warmer than before. Not by much, just a degree or two, but enough to notice. The next morning, I discovered the rest of my team had experienced the same dream. Exact same details. Same landscape, same creatures, same overwhelming sense of witnessing something ancient and terrible. Kevin thought we had all been exposed to some kind of gas or chemical that caused shared hallucinations. Maya suggested carbon monoxide poisoning, but our equipment showed nothing. The air was clean. Our vitals were normal. There was no rational explanation for 5 people having identical dreams, except the ice, the pulsing ice, the ice that was warm, the ice that came from 2,000 feet down where something had been sleeping for 50,000 years. We decided to continue drilling to see if there was more of this strange ice below. That was our second mistake. Our first was bringing the sample up in the first place. But we were scientists, driven by curiosity, and we could not just walk away from the most anomalous discovery of our careers. We drilled deeper. The next core came up the same way. Clear ice, pulsing rhythm, unnatural warmth. And this time, the dream started before we even went to sleep. Robert was standing near the sample when he suddenly zoned out, staring at nothing, his eyes unfocused. When he came back to himself a few minutes later, he described seeing the same volcanic landscape, but from a different angle, as if he was moving through it, swimming through lava, experiencing what those ancient creatures had experienced. The dreams were getting stronger. The ice was waking up. By the third day, none of us could sleep without dreaming of fire. The visions became more detailed, more invasive. We saw the slow death of those magma beings as the earth cooled. We felt their desperation, their rage, their determination to survive by any means necessary. And we understood, in a way that bypassed language, that they were still there, still alive, frozen in the ice but aware, dreaming their way through 50,000 years of sleep, waiting for the world to warm again. The ice cores were getting warmer, all of them. We had 6 samples now, lined up in our equipment shed, and the temperature in that small space had risen 10 degrees despite the freezer units running constantly. The pulsing had synchronized. All 6 cores beat together, like a heart, like something coordinating, like something preparing to wake. Chen was the first to change. We found him standing outside in the middle of the night, barefoot in the snow, staring at the sky. His skin was hot to the touch. When we dragged him back to the tent, he was muttering about the cold, about how the cold was wrong, about how the world needed to burn again. His body temperature was 105 degrees. We packed him in ice, but the fever would not break. By morning, his eyes had changed. The whites had turned dark, like volcanic glass. He looked at us with an expression that was not quite human anymore. And when he spoke, his voice was layered, like multiple voices speaking at once, saying that the long sleep was ending, that the warmth was returning, that soon they would rise from the ice and reclaim their world. We tried to evacuate. We called for a helicopter extraction, but the weather had turned. A storm rolled in, unprecedented for August, temperatures dropping to -30. We were trapped on the ice field with Chen, who was no longer entirely Chen, and 6 ice cores that were now warm enough to melt despite the storm raging outside. The shared dreams became constant. We could not tell if we were awake or asleep anymore. Every time we closed our eyes, we saw fire. Every time we opened them, we saw Chen changing, his skin taking on a dark, glassy texture, his body temperature climbing higher, the snow melting in a circle around wherever he stood. Kevin tried to destroy the ice cores. He took them outside and smashed them with an ice axe. But when the core shattered, something else emerged. Not liquid water. Something dark and viscous that moved on its own, flowing across the ice, seeking heat sources, seeking living bodies. It touched Robert before any of us could react. He screamed. The substance absorbed into his skin in seconds. And then he was changing too, fever rising, eyes darkening. That same alien awareness looking out through his face. Maya and I ran. We abandoned our equipment, our research, everything. We fled across the ice field in the middle of the storm, knowing we were probably going to die but preferring that to what was happening to our team. Behind us, we could hear Chen and Robert calling out, their voices wrong, promising warmth, promising an end to the cold, asking us to come back and join them in the Great Awakening. We made it to a remote ranger station after 6 hours of hiking through the blizzard. The rangers called for help. A rescue team extracted us 2 days later. When they went back to our camp, they found nothing. No equipment, no bodies, just a large area where the ice had melted completely, exposing dark rock beneath, and in the center, a hole drilled straight down, going deeper than our equipment could have reached, as if something had burrowed back into the glacier. Chen and Robert are still missing. The official report says they wandered off in the storm and succumbed to exposure. But I know what really happened. They became part of something older than humanity. They were absorbed into those ancient consciousnesses that have been dreaming in the ice for 50,000 years. And they are down there now, deep in the glacier, helping to wake others, preparing for the day when the world is warm enough for those beings to emerge. The sample I kept, the first core we extracted, is still in my freezer at home. I could not bring myself to destroy it. I should have, but I needed proof, needed evidence of what we found. And every night, it pulses, that slow, steady rhythm. Once every 5 seconds, a heartbeat, a countdown, a reminder that something vast and alien is sleeping beneath the ice. And it is dreaming of the day the cold ends and the fire returns. The planet is warming. Everyone knows that. Glaciers are melting. Ice sheets are retreating. We think of it as a disaster, as something we need to stop. But what if it is exactly what something else has been waiting for? What if beneath the ice caps, in cores buried miles deep, there are other samples of those ancient beings, sleeping and dreaming, counting the centuries, feeling the slow return of warmth? I dream of fire every night. I see those massive shapes moving through lava, and sometimes, in the dreams, they see me back. They know I found them. They know I took a piece of their frozen prison to the surface. And they are grateful, because every sample extracted, every core brought up from the depths, is one less barrier between them and the surface. One more piece of their consciousness freed to wake and spread. The ice is melting, and something beneath it is waking up. Something that remembers when the world burned. Something that wants nothing more than to see that fire return. And every night, in my dreams, I see the future they want. I see the ice caps gone. I see the glaciers vanished. I see those ancient beings emerging from the rock, massive and terrible and finally warm again. And I see what happens to humanity when beings that thrived in molten stone decide they want their planet back. Story 8. McCandless Trapper. I found Daniel McCrae's journal in an abandoned trapper's cabin north of Healy. And what he wrote in those final pages has convinced me that Christopher McCandless wasn't the only person the Alaskan wilderness claimed that winter. And maybe what killed them both wasn't starvation or cold, but something far worse that is still out there waiting. My name is Ryan Kovach. I am a wildlife photographer. Spent half the year in Alaska documenting animals in their natural habitat. Last November I was hiking near the Stampede Trail, same area where McCandless died in that bus back in '92, looking for a good location to shoot caribou migration. The weather turned faster than forecast. Blizzard conditions, zero visibility. I had maybe an hour before hypothermia would start setting in. That's when I found the cabin, half buried in snow, roof sagging but intact. The door was unlocked. Inside it was dark and freezing, but at least it blocked the wind. I got my emergency stove going, melted snow for water, and settled in to wait out the storm. The place was ancient, logs so old they were almost petrified, a rusted iron stove, shelves with rotted supplies, and on a small table near the window, a leather journal so dry it cracked when I picked it up. The name inside the cover read Daniel McCrae. The first entry was dated September 1992. The same year McCandless died. I heard stories about an old trapper who lived out here. A hermit who had been in these woods for 40 years. Some people said he tried to help McCandless. Others said he warned him to leave. Nobody knew what happened to McCrae himself. He just disappeared that winter and was never found. I started reading by flashlight while the storm howled outside. The early entries were mundane. Weather observations, animal sightings, notes about trapline maintenance. McCrae wrote about seeing a young man camped at the bus, described him as unprepared but determined, said he offered help but been refused. Then the entries changed, started focusing on something McCrae called the ghost moose. He first mentioned it in late October. Tracks he found that were larger than any moose prints he'd seen in 4 decades of trapping. The stride length was wrong. Too long, too deliberate. He followed them for 3 miles through fresh snow until they simply stopped. Not at a tree line, not at a river, just ended in the middle of an open field like whatever made them had stepped into thin air. McCrae was skeptical at first, thought maybe the wind had covered the tracks, but he kept finding the same pattern. Massive moose prints that would appear suddenly and vanish without explanation. Always in areas where the snow was undisturbed, always stopping in impossible places. By November he was obsessed, started going out every day looking for the tracks, following them whenever he found them. He wrote about seeing the moose itself once, at distance, near sunset. Described it as enormous, easily 8 feet at the shoulder. Antlers that spread wider than any rack he'd ever seen. But something about it was wrong. The proportions were off. The way it moved didn't match natural moose behavior. And its eyes. McCrae wrote several paragraphs about the eyes. Said when it looked at him he felt recognition. Intelligence. Not animal intelligence. Human intelligence. Like something was looking out through the moose's eyes. Something that understood what it was seeing and found it amusing. The entries became more frantic after that. McCrae started setting traps specifically for the ghost moose. Heavy snares, deadfalls, equipment designed for bears or wolves. Nothing worked. The moose would walk right through his trap line without triggering anything. Sometimes it would stop and look directly at where McCrae was hiding. Stand there for minutes, just watching, waiting. December brought darker observations. McCrae wrote about finding other tracks near the ghost moose prints. Human tracks, bare feet, in snow, at 30 below zero. He followed them once and found Christopher McCandless, his boss. The young man was still alive then, but barely. McCrae tried again to convince him to leave, to get proper supplies, but McCandless refused, said he was fine, said he understood what he was doing. McCrae wrote that he saw the ghost moose watching from the tree line while he talked to McCandless. Saw it standing perfectly still, those intelligent eyes fixed on the bus. And he had a terrible thought that maybe the moose wasn't hunting him. Maybe it was hunting McCandless. And he was just in the way. The January entries were where things got truly disturbing. McCrae started having dreams about the moose. Vivid dreams where it would speak to him. Not with words, but with pure meaning transmitted directly into his mind. It told him things, secrets about the wilderness, about what really lives in the deep forests, about the things that watch humans from the shadows and sometimes decide to play with us, to test us, to see how long we last. He wrote that the moose wasn't an animal. It was something older, something that had learned to wear animal shapes the way humans wear clothes. It had been in these woods for centuries, watching trappers and hunters and settlers. Most of the time it just observed. But sometimes, when someone ventured too far from civilization, when someone showed the kind of arrogance that McCandless had shown, it would hunt. Not for food, for sport, for the pleasure of watching someone slowly realize they made a terrible mistake. That they weren't in control. That they were prey. McCrae became convinced the ghost moose had marked McCandless, was slowly killing him, not through direct violence but through psychological warfare, making him see things, hear things, driving him deeper into paranoia and isolation until his body simply gave up. The February entries were nearly illegible. McCrae's handwriting had deteriorated. He wrote about finding McCandless dead in the bus, about reporting it but being told the body wouldn't be recovered until spring, about going back to check and finding massive moose tracks circling the bus, about seeing the ghost moose standing on the bus roof, something that should have been impossible. The metal should have collapsed under that weight. But it stood there, looking down at the dead man inside. And McCrae swore he saw it smile. The final entries were short, dated late March. McCrae wrote that the ghost moose had turned its attention to him now. That it appeared outside his cabin every night. That it would scrape its antlers against the logs, a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard that would last for hours. That it was waiting for him to break, to run, to give it the chase it wanted. The last entry was a single sentence dated March 28, 1993. It said, The tracks lead to my door, but there are no tracks leading away, and I can hear it breathing on the other side. That is where the journal ended. I sat there in the dark cabin, listening to the storm outside, my hands shaking. McCrae had disappeared in March of '93. His body was never found. Most people assumed he'd gotten lost in a storm or fallen through ice. But now I knew better. I looked at the door, solid wood, still intact after 30 years. And I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Deep gouges in the wood. 4 parallel lines, like something with massive claws had tried to tear its way through. And on the floor near the door, stains. Dark stains that might have been blood or might have been something else. The storm was still raging, but I couldn't stay in that cabin anymore. I packed my gear, took the journal, and stepped out into the blizzard. The snow was so thick I could barely see 5 feet ahead. But I had my GPS, could navigate back to where I left my snowmobile. I made it maybe 200 yards before I found the tracks. Moose tracks, massive, fresh, despite the blizzard, despite the accumulating snow. These tracks were clearly visible. Deep impressions in the powder. And they were following my path. My exact path, like something had been watching me leave the cabin and decided to pursue. I started moving faster. Not quite running, but close. The tracks stayed with me, parallel to my route, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, like whatever made them was circling, playing. Then I saw it through the snow. A shape, enormous. Standing between 2 spruce trees. The antlers were the first thing I noticed. Impossibly wide, impossibly complex, like branches from a dead tree but organic, living, and below them, eyes. Large eyes that caught what little light penetrated the storm. Eyes that looked directly at me with unmistakable intelligence. It didn't move, just stood there, watching, and I felt what McCrae had described. That sense of recognition, of being seen not as another animal but as something interesting, something worth toying with. I ran, survival instinct overriding everything else. My snowmobile was close, maybe a quarter mile. I could hear myself gasping, feel my lungs burning in the cold air. Behind me I heard heavy footsteps. Slow, deliberate, not chasing, following, like it knew I couldn't escape and was savoring my panic. I reached the snowmobile and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in. The engine turned over, caught. I gunned it without looking back. Just drove through the storm toward the main road, toward civilization, toward safety. I made it to Healy before the storm cleared. Spent the night in a motel. Couldn't sleep. Just sat there with McCrae, this journal, reading those final entries over and over. In the morning I went to the state troopers. Showed them what I found. Told them about the cabin. About the tracks. They were polite but skeptical. Said they'd investigate when weather permitted. Asked if I wanted to file a report. I said no. Just wanted them to know. To have it documented somewhere official. I left Alaska 2 days later. Haven, been back since. The journal is in a safety deposit box in Seattle. Sometimes I think about donating it to a museum, making McCrae's story public. But I am afraid of what attention that might bring. Afraid of sending more people into those woods looking for answers. Because here is what I can stop thinking about. Christopher McCandless died of starvation in that bus. That is the official cause. But McCrae's journal suggests something else. Something that hunted him. Drove him to desperation, made him eat the wrong plants or miss obvious food sources. Something that wanted to watch him slowly waste away. And McCrae himself disappeared without a trace. No body, no evidence, just an abandoned cabin and a journal full of impossible stories about a moose that wasn't a moose. I've done research since then. Found other accounts. Hunters who reported seeing massive moose with human-like intelligence. Hikers who found tracks that vanished inexplicably. Old native stories about shapeshifters that take animal forms and hunt the arrogant. The warnings that some places in Alaska belong to things that aren't to animals and aren't quite spirits but something in between. Something patient. Something that watches and waits and occasionally decides to remind humans that we're not the apex predators we think we are. The thing that terrifies me most is this. McCrae, this last entry said the tracks led to his door but didn't lead away. Which means whatever came for him that night didn't leave. Or it left in a form that didn't leave tracks. Or it is still there. Still in those woods. Still hunting anyone who ventures too far with too much confidence. I sometimes wonder if I should have stayed in that cabin. Waited for whatever was following me. Confronted it. But I know how that would have ended. The same way it ended for McCrae. The same way it ended for McCandless. Just another person who thought they could master the wilderness and learned too late that the wilderness was never empty. That something ancient lives in those forests. Something that wears familiar shapes and watches with patient intelligence and occasionally chooses prey not for hunger but for the pure pleasure of the hunt. Story 9. Ice maze. I was the only one who made it out of the ice maze we built in Nome in 1996. And what hunted us in there wasn't something that should exist in this world. My name is Ryan Castellano. I'm 57 years old now, a high school history teacher in Spokane. But back in February of 1996, I was 17 and living in Nome, Alaska. I was stupid, reckless, the kind of kid who thought he was invincible because he survived 17 winters in one of the harshest places on Earth. That arrogance almost got me killed. It did get my 4 best friends killed, even though their bodies were never found. The winter of '96 was brutal, even by Alaska standards. A massive storm system parked itself over the Bering Strait and just kept dumping snow. By mid-February, the snowbanks along the edges of town were 15, sometimes 20 feet high. Mountains of white that blocked out the sun and turned the streets into narrow canyons. The city had run out of places to push the snow. It just kept piling up, getting higher and denser until those banks became walls. Barriers, mazes, that's what gave us the idea. Me and my friends, Jake, Marcus, Ellen, and Sarah, we were bored out of our minds. School had been canceled for a week. Nothing to do but sit inside and watch the same movies on VHS over and over. So when Jake suggested we build something in one of the massive snowbanks on the edge of town, we jumped at it. Not just a fort, something bigger, something impressive. We decided to build a maze. We picked a snowbank near the old mining equipment yard, about a mile from the center of town. The bank was enormous, maybe 18 feet tall and stretched for 100 yards along an abandoned access road. The snow was packed solid from weeks of wind and compression. Hard enough to carve, hard enough to hold its shape. We spent 3 days working on it, brought shovels and saws and even a chainsaw that Marcus stole from his dad's garage. We carved tunnels and passages, dead ends and chambers. Made it complex, made it confusing, the kind of maze that would take 20 minutes to solve even if you knew the path. We were proud of it, thought we created something amazing. The entrance was a narrow opening at ground level, just wide enough for one person to crawl through. Inside, the passages were tall enough to stand in, maybe 6 feet high, carved through solid snow. The walls were smooth and white and slightly reflective, like ice. The ceiling was thick enough to block out most of the light, so we brought flashlights. Made it atmospheric, made it feel like a real adventure. On February 19th, we decided to run the maze. All 5 of us, we take different starting points, see who could reach the center first. There was a chamber in the middle where all the passages eventually led. We marked it with a red bandana tied to a stick pushed into the snow. First one there wins. We should have noticed the cold. It was colder inside the maze than it should have been. Not just winter cold, this was different, deeper. The kind of cold that comes from below, from the earth itself. The kind that seeps into your bones and doesn't leave. But we were teenagers. We were excited. We ignored the warning signs. I entered through the main passage. Jake took the eastern entrance. We carved. Marcus went north. The girls took the western passages. We synchronized our watches, gave ourselves an hour to solve it. If anyone wasn't at the center by then, they all worked together to find them. Simple, safe, or so we thought. The moment I got 20 feet into the maze, my flashlight started acting strange. The beam would flicker and dim for no reason. The batteries were fresh, but the light kept fading like something was draining the power. I tapped it against my palm a few times. It stabilized. I kept moving. The passages were tighter than I remembered. We carved them wide enough to walk comfortably, but they felt narrower now. Closer, like the walls had shifted inward. I told myself it was just perception, the darkness playing tricks on my eyes. But I had to turn sideways to get through some sections that I knew had been wider the day before. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when I realized I was lost. The maze wasn't that complicated. I helped design it. I knew the layout, but nothing looked right. Passages led in directions they shouldn't. Dead ends appeared where there should have been turns. The whole structure felt wrong, rearranged. That's when I heard the sound. It came from somewhere behind me. A scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across packed snow. I stopped walking, listened. The sound stopped too. I started moving again. The sound resumed, matching my pace. following me. I called out for Jake, for Marcus, for anyone. My voice echoed strangely in the narrow passages, bouncing back distorted and wrong. No one answered. I was alone in there, or at least alone with whatever was making that scraping sound. I picked up my pace, tried to retrace my steps back to the entrance, but the passages had changed. I swear to God, they had changed. Walls were in different places. Turns led to chambers I didn't recognize. It was like the maze was shifting around me, reconfiguring itself, keeping me lost. My flashlight died completely, just went black. I shook it, banged it. Nothing. I was in absolute darkness, in a maze that was changing, with something behind me that scraped and dragged and followed. I felt my way along the walls. The snow was different now. Harder, colder. It burned my hands through my gloves, and the texture was wrong. The walls we decarved had been smooth. These walls had texture, patterns. When I ran my fingers across them, I felt grooves, lines, shapes that felt almost deliberate, almost like writing. That's when I heard Ellie scream. It came from somewhere to my left, through the walls. A short, sharp scream that cut off suddenly. Then silence. I yelled her name, pounded on the wall. The snow was too thick, too solid. I couldn't break through. I tried to follow the sound, find a passage that led in her direction. But the maze wouldn't let me. Every turn I took led me away from where I heard her scream. I found Marcus, his flashlight in one of the passages, just lying there in the snow. Still on. I grabbed it. The beam was weak, but it was better than nothing. I called Marcus, his name. No answer. Just that scraping sound again. Closer now. Definitely closer. I ran. Didn't care about finding the center anymore. Just wanted out. Wanted to get back to the entrance and get the hell away from whatever was in there with us. But every passage looked the same. Every turn led to more passages. The maze had grown, expanded. What should have been a simple structure we could walk through in 20 minutes had become something vast and impossible. I turned a corner and saw it. The man made of snow. He was standing at the far end of a long passage, maybe 30 feet away. The flashlight beam hit him straight on, and I could see every detail. He wasn't built, wasn't sculpted. He was formed, like he'd grown out of the packed snow itself. His body was the same texture as the walls. Compressed snow, dense and solid. But he had a shape, a human shape, 7 feet tall, arms too long, fingers that ended in points. His face was the worst part. It wasn't blank. It had features, eyes that were just dark hollows, a mouth that was a ragged crack across the lower half of his face. And those features were moving, shifting. The snow that formed him was constantly rearranging, flowing like water but staying solid. His face would change expression, cycling through different configurations. Sometimes angry, sometimes curious, sometimes something I couldn't identify because it was too alien to human emotion. He started walking toward me. Not fast, just steady, deliberate. His movements were wrong, jerky, like a stop-motion animation. He'd be in one position, then suddenly in another, without the smooth transition between. Each step closed the distance by 5 feet instead of 2, covering ground faster than should be possible while moving slower than normal. I ran, turned down a side passage. The scraping sound was right behind me now. He was dragging something. I didn't look back to see what. Didn't want to know. Just ran through passage after passage, the weak flashlight beam bouncing off white walls that all looked identical. I found Sarah's jacket in another chamber. Just her jacket. She wasn't wearing it. It was laid out carefully in the center of the floor, arms spread wide, like she'd been wearing it when she disappeared and it had just fallen through her body. The snow beneath it was disturbed, torn up, signs of a struggle. But no Sarah, no blood, no evidence of what had happened except the jacket and the disturbed snow. The walls around that chamber had those grooves again, those patterns. I looked closer with the flashlight. They weren't too random. They were symbols. Angular shapes carved into the compressed snow. And they were moving, slowly shifting and rearranging themselves like living things. Like they were trying to form words. Trying to communicate something. I heard Jake's voice. He was screaming. Not words, just raw terror. The sound came from above me. From inside the ceiling. I looked up. The packed snow overhead was 15 feet thick. There was no way he could be up there. No way he could have gotten inside the solid mass. But I heard him screaming and pounding. Heard his voice getting fainter, like he was being pulled deeper into the snow, like the maze was swallowing him. Then silence again, just me and the scraping sound. I kept moving, The passages were narrower now. I had to squeeze through some of them. The walls were closing in. The maze was compressing, trying to crush me, trying to trap me like it had trapped the others. I could feel the weight of the snow pressing in from all sides. Could feel the cold seeping through my clothes and into my skin. I turned a corner and came face to face with the snowman again. He was just standing there, waiting, like he didn't know which passage I'd take. His hollow eyes fixed on me, his mouth crack opening and closing. And then he did something that made my blood freeze. He spoke, not with a voice. There was no sound, but I heard words in my head, inside my skull, like he was projecting thoughts directly into my brain. The words didn't make sense. They were in a language I didn't know. But I understood the meaning. He was telling me about the maze, about what it was. This wasn't something we built. We just carved into something that was already here. Something old, something that had been compressed in the snow for a very long time, waiting. And when we created passages through it, when we opened it up, we woke it. The maze was alive, or it had been alive once. A structure built by something that existed before humans came to Alaska. Built and then buried under centuries of snow and ice. Dormant, preserved, and we carved right into it. We made doorways. We entered, and now it was using us, absorbing us, adding us to itself. The snowman wasn't hunting us. He was herding us, pushing us deeper into the maze, deeper into the structure, taking us to the center. The real center, not the chamber we demarked with a bandana. The actual heart of the thing, where it could fully absorb us, make us part of the walls, part of the patterns, part of whatever this thing was. I understood all of this in an instant, and I understood that my friends were already gone, already absorbed, already part of the maze. Their screams had been the sound of integration, of their consciousness being transferred into the structure. They weren't dead. They were trapped, aware, inside the snow. The snowman took a step toward me. I had seconds, maybe less. I looked around desperately, saw a thin spot in the wall to my left, a place where the snow looked less dense, less solid. I didn't think, just threw myself at it, hit it with my shoulder like a linebacker. The wall gave way. I burst through into open air and daylight. I'd been moving in a spiral, getting closer to the outside edge without realizing it. I stumbled out onto the access road, gasping, my clothes covered in snow, my hands bleeding where I clawed through the wall. I looked back at the maze. From outside, it looked normal, just a snowbank with some carved passages. But I knew the truth, knew what was inside. I ran all the way back to town, found the police, told them everything. They sent a search team, 10 men with ropes and radios. They went into the maze, searched every passage we carved, found nothing, no sign of my friends, no snowman, no shifting walls, just snow. They searched for 3 days, found Marcus, his flashlight where I dropped it, found Sarah, his jacket, found Jake, his glove, but no bodies, no evidence of what happened. The official explanation was that they'd gotten lost and died of exposure, that their bodies would show up when the snow melted. But spring came, the snowbank melted. There was nothing underneath, no bodies, no equipment, nothing, just dirt and gravel where the maze had been. I left Nome that summer. Couldn't to walk past that access road without feeling them, without knowing they were still in there, still trapped in whatever that structure was, still screaming inside the snow. I am 57 now. Haven't been back to Nome in 28 years. But I dream about the maze every single night. I see my friends, see them frozen in the walls, their faces pressed against the inside of the snow, eyes open, mouths open, trying to scream but making no sound. And I see the snowman, still waiting, still patient, still hurting people deeper, because we weren't the first. That structure is old, ancient, and it's everywhere under the snow, connected, a vast network of passages and chambers that exist beneath the surface, waiting for someone to carve into it, waiting to be opened. Every winter, when the snow gets deep enough, it is there. And every winter, someone builds something in the snowbanks, a fort, a cave, a maze, and sometimes they don't to come back out. Story 10. Phantom frequency. The coordinates led me to a footprint that should not exist. And now I understand that some roads in Alaska are not meant for living people. I need to tell you what I found at the end of that phantom radio signal before I follow those coordinates one more time and never come back. My name is Jack Morrison. I am a long-haul trucker, 51 years old, and I have been running freight up the Dalton Highway for 23 years. The Dalton is not like other roads. It is 414 miles of gravel and ice cutting through the most remote wilderness in North America, connecting Fairbanks to the oil fields at Prudhoe Bay. No towns, no gas stations for long stretches. Just you, your rig, and an emptiness so vast it makes you feel like the last person on Earth. I have driven that highway in every season, every condition. I have seen the northern lights dance across the sky at 3 in the morning. I have navigated through whiteouts where I could not see the hood of my truck. I have watched caribou herds 10,000 strong cross the road, blocking traffic for hours. The Dalton demands respect. It kills people every year. But I knew it. I understood it, or I thought I did. 3 weeks ago, on a run north during the first real cold snap of winter, I picked up a radio signal I had never heard before. It came through on CB Channel 19, the trucker channel, cutting through the usual chatter and static. A man's voice, calm, almost unnaturally calm, reading numbers. At first, I thought it was coordinates. Maritime or aviation frequencies sometimes bleed over, but these numbers were specific. Latitude and longitude in degrees, minutes, and seconds. North 67 degrees, 42 minutes, 18 seconds. West 150 degrees, 6 minutes, 41 seconds. The voice repeated them 3 times, slowly and clearly, then went silent. I had been driving for 8 hours straight. I was tired. The numbers meant nothing to me. I figured it was some kind of emergency beacon or a pilot reporting a position. I kept driving, but 20 minutes later, the voice came back. Same coordinates, same calm tone. And this time, I noticed something else. There was no background noise. No static, no ambient sound. Just the voice, clean and clear, like the speaker was sitting in my cab. Other truckers heard it too. I listened to them talking about it on the CB. Some thought it was a prank. Others said it was a distress signal from a downed plane. One old-timer named Carl said he had heard it before, years ago, always in winter, always on the Dalton. He said people who followed those coordinates never talked about what they found, and some never came back at all. I should have ignored it. I should have kept my focus on the road and my delivery schedule. But those coordinates kept nagging at me. I pulled over at the Coldfoot truck stop, the only real services between Fairbanks and Prudhoe, and I checked them on my GPS. They pointed to a location about 18 miles west of the highway, deep in the Brooks Range. No roads, no trails, just wilderness. The voice came through again that night while I was parked, trying to sleep in my cab. Same coordinates, but this time, after the numbers, the voice added something else. A single word, help, then silence. That changed everything. Someone was out there. Someone needed assistance. I could not just drive past and pretend I had not heard. So the next morning, I rented a snowmobile from a local guide company, telling them I wanted to do some winter sightseeing. They looked at me like I was crazy but took my money. By noon, I was heading west into the wilderness, following my GPS toward those coordinates. The terrain was brutal, snow 3 feet deep, jagged rocks hidden beneath the surface, mountains rising on all sides, cutting off the weak winter sun by 3 in the afternoon. I drove for 2 hours, the snowmobile struggling through drifts, my face numb despite my insulated mask. The temperature was -30 and dropping. I reached the coordinates just as full darkness fell. My headlight cut through the night, illuminating a small clearing surrounded by stunted trees. And there, in the exact center, I found what I was looking for. A footprint, a single human footprint, perfectly preserved in the snow, fresh enough that the edges were still crisp, the tread pattern from a boot clearly visible. But that was all, just one print. No trail leading to it, no trail leading away, just that one impossible footprint sitting alone in the middle of the wilderness. I circled the clearing 3 times, searching for any other tracks, any sign of how someone could have left a single footprint without leaving others. Nothing. The snow around it was untouched, pristine. It was like someone had appeared in that spot, pressed one foot down, and then vanished. I stood there staring at it, my mind trying to find a rational explanation. A helicopter drop, but there was no downdraft disturbance in the snow. A hoax, but who would come this far into the wilderness to plant a fake footprint that almost nobody would ever see? And the print looked fresh, hours old at most, but the coordinates had been broadcasting for days. That was when I heard the voice again. Not on my radio this time. In the air around me. The same calm tone, the same measured words, but now it was reading different coordinates. A new location, farther north, deeper into the mountains. And after the coordinates, that same word, Help. I ran back to my snowmobile. I do not know why I ran. The voice was not threatening, but something about hearing it without a radio, hearing it come from the empty air itself, triggered pure animal panic. I started the engine and raced back toward the highway, not caring about the terrain, just needing to get away from that clearing and that impossible footprint. I made it back to Coldfoot at midnight, frozen and exhausted. I returned the snowmobile and got in my truck, planning to drive straight through to Fairbanks and forget the whole thing. But the voice was still there, still broadcasting on Channel 19. And now other truckers were responding to it. A driver named Tom said he was going to check out the coordinates. Said it was his duty to help if someone was stranded. I tried to warn him, tried to tell him what I had found. He laughed it off and said I had probably just seen a bear track or gotten turned around in the dark. Tom never made his delivery. They found his snowmobile 3 days later, abandoned at the coordinates, out of gas. No sign of Tom, but in the snow next to his machine, they found another footprint. Just one, different boot pattern than the first. Like Tom had stepped out of his snowmobile, placed one foot down, and disappeared. The search and rescue team combed that area for a week. They found nothing else. No body, no tracks, no evidence of what happened. Tom's family is still waiting for answers. The official report says he likely wandered off and died of exposure, but they cannot explain the single footprint or where the rest of his tracks went. After Tom disappeared, the phantom frequency went quiet for 10 days. No broadcasts, no coordinates. Some truckers said it was over, that whatever the signal was, it had stopped. But I knew better. I kept my CB tuned to Channel 19, waiting, dreading what I knew was coming. Last week, the voice returned. New coordinates, same calm tone. And this time, I recognized something I had missed before. The voice had an echo to it, a slight doubling, like two people speaking the exact same words at the exact same moment. And one of those voices sounded familiar. It sounded like Tom. I pulled the recordings I had made on my phone when I first heard the broadcasts. I compared them. The original voice was definitely there, but now, layered underneath it, barely audible, was Tom's voice. Speaking in perfect unison with the original. Reading coordinates, saying help, calling others to join him. 3 more truckers have gone missing since then. All of them heard the broadcast. All of them decided to investigate. Search teams found their vehicles at the coordinates, and next to each vehicle, a single footprint. Different boot patterns, different sizes, but always just one print. Always impossible. The voice on the radio has gotten louder, clearer, and there are more voices now. 5 of them, speaking as one, reading coordinates that change every few days, leading deeper and deeper into the wilderness. I can identify 3 of the voices. Tom, a driver named Sarah who disappeared 2 weeks ago, and a rescue worker named Mike who went looking for Sarah and never came back. They are calling others. Every night, the phantom frequency broadcasts new coordinates. And every few days, another person disappears, leaves one footprint, and joins the chorus of voices. The footprints are forming a pattern. I have marked all the locations on a map. They create a rough circle around a central point deep in the Brooks Range, a location so remote it does not appear on any survey. And the circle is getting smaller. Each new set of coordinates is closer to the center. I think I know what is happening. I think something exists in that central location. Something that needs people. That calls them with those calm voices, those cries for help. Those coordinates that lead to nothing but a single footprint. And when you stand in that spot, when you place your foot in that exact location, something reaches out from wherever it exists and takes you. Not your body, just you, your consciousness, your voice, and it uses you to call others. The footprints are not where people ended their journeys. They are where people began a different kind of existence, where they stepped from our reality into something else. And that something else is hungry. It has been calling for decades, according to Carl, pulling people one by one into its collection, using their voices to lure more. I should stay away. I should stop listening to Channel 19. But I can, because last night, the voice read my name. It said, Jack Morrison, come home. We are waiting for you. And the coordinates it gave were for a new location. The closest one yet to the center of that circle. The next point in the pattern. Part of me knows this is insane. Part of me knows I should report everything to the authorities. Should warn other truckers. Should do anything except what I am planning to do. But another part of me, a part that grew stronger every time I heard that broadcast, needs to know. Needs to see what is at the center. Needs to understand what could possibly be calling people from the empty wilderness and erasing them from existence except for a single frozen footprint. I am writing this in my truck at the Coldfoot stop. In 1 hour, I am heading out to the latest coordinates. I have a snowmobile. I have supplies. I have a GPS that will mark my exact route. I am leaving this document with the truck stop manager with instructions to give it to authorities if I do not return by tomorrow night. The voice is broadcasting right now. I can hear it through my CB. 5 voices speaking as one, reading the coordinates, saying my name, saying help. And underneath all of it, so faint I can barely hear it, is laughter. Not cruel laughter, not menacing, just the sound of people who have discovered something wonderful and want to share it, who have found a way out of the cold and the dark and the endless empty miles of the Dalton Highway. Maybe that is what the footprints really mean. Not disappearances, departures, people choosing to step out of this reality and into something else. Something that does not require your body, just your voice and your willingness to call others to join you. Something that exists in a place where coordinates and footprints are the only doorways. I do not know if I will leave a footprint when I reach the location. I do not know if I will join the voices on the phantom frequency, speaking in perfect unison with the others, reading coordinates to truckers who drive the loneliest road in America. But I need to find out. I need to understand what could be worth leaving everything behind for. What could make Tom and Sarah and Mike and all the others choose to stay in that frozen wilderness and become nothing but voices calling from the dark? The Dalton Highway has always been a road between places, between cities and oil fields, between civilization and wilderness, between life and death. Maybe it is also a road between realities. And maybe, if you listen to the right frequency, if you follow the right coordinates, if you stand in exactly the right spot and look at a single footprint in the snow, you can choose which reality you want to exist in. I am going to find out. And if you are a trucker on the Dalton Highway, if you hear a calm voice on Channel 19 reading coordinates, if you recognize my voice among the others calling for help, do not follow us. Do not try to understand. Just drive past and keep going. Because once you see that footprint, once you stand where we stood, the choice will not really be yours anymore. You will need to know. And once you know, you will want to join us. The voice is calling. The coordinates are clear. The footprint is waiting. I'm going home. And that's where our path ends, for now. Out here in Alaska, the silence feels endless, but the stories never really stop. If tonight's whispers chilled you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll always know when another story emerges from the dark. I'd love to hear where you're listening from or the strange things you've seen yourself. Leave it in the comments below. The night up here doesn't let go easily, and neither do the tales. We'll meet again soon, if the snow lets us through.